Along the quiet edges of the Maryland shoreline, where the Chesapeake Bay stretches wide and dark beneath the moon, there are homes built high above the water on fragile bluffs. From a distance, they look peaceful. Elegant silhouettes against the sky. Windows glowing softly above the endless tide. But when night settles in, the bay begins to breathe. Waves strike the cliffs below with slow, steady force. Wind moves through empty rooms like whispered warnings. And lights flicker in houses where no one has lived for years. Locals speak in low voices about these bluff homes. About families who vanished without explanation. About footsteps heard on collapsing staircases. About figures standing at windows, staring down into the black water long after the houses were abandoned. Some say the land itself is cursed. Eroding slowly. Dragging memories, bodies, and secrets toward the bay below. Tonight, we walk the edge where land meets water. To explore the most haunted Chesapeake Bluff homes in Maryland. Places where the past clings to the cliffs. And where something still watches the tide from above. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly grateful you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere warm and safe, far from crumbling cliffs and dark water. Because the places we are about to visit are filled with unease. The Chesapeake Bay has always been both beautiful and dangerous. It provided food, trade, and travel for centuries. But it also claimed lives through storms, shipwrecks, and silent drownings. Homes were built high on the bluffs overlooking the bay. They offered breathtaking views. But they were also built on land that slowly gives way. Some of these homes witnessed tragedy. Storms that tore families apart. Falls from unstable cliffs. Arguments that ended in silence and disappearance. As erosion claimed the land, many houses were abandoned. But neighbors insist the houses were never empty. People report hearing furniture move inside locked homes. Seeing silhouettes at windows during storms. And feeling a sudden urge to step closer to the edge when standing near the cliffs. Before we step any closer, let me ask you something. If you were staying alone in a house perched on a bluff above dark water, and late at night you heard footsteps moving toward the cliffside door, would you investigate the sound or lock yourself inside and wait for morning? Tell me your answer in the comments. Now take a slow breath. Listen to the distant waves. And let us begin our journey through the haunted Chesapeake Bluff homes of Maryland. On a high, windswept promontory overlooking the Bay of Lorne stands a solitary structure known as Black Tide Bluff House. It is a stark, Victorian-era home built from local granite, its windows perpetually salt-fogged, its shutters rattling in the coastal gales. Its most striking feature is its view, a panoramic vista of the sea. But directly below the house, in a specific crescent of the bay, the water is unnaturally dark. It is not the dark of depth, for the charts show it is shallow there. It is a pure, light-absorbing blackness, like a pool of ink that refuses to mix with the surrounding sea, a permanent stain on the water's surface. When night falls, the sensory experience of the house intensifies. The waves striking the base of the bluff do not crash in their usual chaotic rhythm. Instead, they beat in slow, deliberate, heavy impacts. It is a funereal cadence, a measured pounding like a giant's heartbeat, felt through the stone foundations of the house as much as it is heard. Inside the empty rooms, another sound begins. It is the distinct sound of dragging footsteps. They are heavy and labored, as if the walker is exhausted or burdened. The footsteps are not random. They follow a specific path, moving from the house's front foyer, through the central hall, and into the rear parlor, the room with the largest windows facing the blackened bay. They stop in the parlor, and a profound silence follows, as if someone is now standing at the window, looking out. No returning footsteps are ever heard. The house was built by a retired sea captain, Alastair Finch. He made his fortune in the maritime trade but was haunted by a singular event. Late in his career, his ship encountered a freak, localized storm. In the chaos, a young crewman, a man Finch had personally brought aboard, was swept overboard. The sea that night, according to Finch's private logs, was not water but ink, a black, boiling void. Though they searched for hours, the man was lost. Consumed by a guilt he never articulated. Finch built this house overlooking the sea, choosing the bluff for its view of the exact stretch of water that matched his memory of that dark night. Finch lived there as a recluse. Servants reported he would stand for hours in the rear parlor, staring at the bay, particularly at the dark patch that seemed to grow a little larger each season. He began to walk with a pronounced, dragging gait in his final years, his legs weakened by age and perhaps by the weight of his fixation. He died in that parlor, his eyes fixed on the window. The black water defies oceanographic explanation. Samples show no unusual chemical or biological activity. It is, by all measurable standards, normal seawater. Yet, the darkness persists, a visual anomaly. The slow, rhythmic waves are acoustically strange. The shape of the bluff beneath the house creates a resonance that stretches the sound of impact, but not to the degree witnesses describe. The footsteps are the most investigated phenomenon. Vibration sensors placed throughout the house detect subtle movements that correspond to the reported path, but the pattern does not match the settling of an old structure or the wind. The sound is consistently described as a drag, not a clear step, matching Captain Finch's later years. To spend a night in Black Tide Bluff House is to be a guest in a loop of profound remorse. The dark bay below is a permanent externalization of a memory, a stain on the world mirroring a stain on a conscience. The slow, heavy waves are the drumbeat of that guilt. And the footsteps are the ritual. They are not a ghost searching, but a ghost arriving, compelled each night to retrace the final journey of its living self to the window. To stand vigil over the dark water it both created and mourns. The house is not haunted by a person, but by a single, corrosive thought, played out eternally in sound and shadow. The footsteps do not wander, they are purposeful. They move always toward the darkness, drawn to the very thing that symbolizes the loss. Completing a pilgrimage of penance that begins in the foyer of memory and ends, every night, at the window overlooking the black tide. A silent figure forever watching, waiting, and bearing witness to the deep, dark spot in the bay that should not be there. High on the bluffs above the old commercial bay stands a grand, weathered house known as Widow's Overlook. It was built in an era of maritime wealth, a three-story Victorian with a wide, wraparound balcony facing the sea. Its windows are now dark, its paint peeled by salt wind, but its position remains commanding, offering a sweeping, unobstructed view of the harbor entrance and the vast gray ocean beyond. The house is empty, yet it is never truly unoccupied. The story is woven into the town's history. In the late 1800s, the house belonged to Captain Elias Thorne and his young wife, Linnea. Elias commanded a sleek clipper ship that ran tea and silk from the Orient. His voyages were long, sometimes lasting years. Linnea, it is said, would take to the balcony each evening as his scheduled return window approached. She would stand for hours, a telescope often in her hand, scanning the horizon for the specific cut of his ship's sails. It was a ritual of hope and patience. On one voyage, the ship, the Zephyr, was lost. No wreckage was ever found. It vanished into the mysteries of the Pacific, taking Captain Thorne and his entire crew with it. The official notifications were sent. The mourning period observed by the town. But for Linnea, the ritual did not end. She continued to walk out onto that balcony every single evening. As if the official word was a mistake. As if her watchful gaze could will the ship back from the depths. She maintained this vigil for decades. Until her own passing. A woman forever waiting. That time and tide had made impossible. Today, the house is silent, owned by distant relatives who never visit. But those who live in the cottages below, or sailors returning after dark, often glance up at the bluff. They report seeing, with startling clarity, the figure of a woman standing on the balcony. She is often described wearing a long, dark dress, her hands resting on the railing or clasped before her. She does not pace. She does not lift a telescope. She simply stands, a study in profound attention. The figure appears as the last light fades and remains through the night. Fishermen heading out before dawn have reported seeing her still there, a dark sentinel against the gradually lightening sky. A dark sentinel against the gradually lightening sky. She is gone by full sunrise, as if dissolved by the light she spent a lifetime waiting for. The apparition is not frequent, but it is consistent, appearing most often on clear nights when the bay is calm, the very conditions ideal for spotting a distant sail. An emotional imprint on a location. Linnea's nightly vigil was an act of such intense, focused energy. Repeated over thousands of evenings, that it may have etched itself into the very fabric of the house and the land. The figure is not an interactive spirit, but a playback of that specific action. A shadow of habit cast by a profound love that turned into unwavering faith. And then into perpetual sorrow. The power of Widowa's overlook lies in its stark simplicity. There is no sound, no movement, no interaction. The haunting is purely visual, a silhouette of expectation. It speaks to the human capacity for hope even in the face of absolute certainty. Linnea is not waiting for news. She is waiting for a reversal of fate, and in that place, her waiting has become a permanent feature, as much a part of the landscape as the bluff itself. To see the figure is to feel a profound, melancholy stillness. It is a reminder that some losses are so total they become a way of being. The house is not haunted by a ghost who is confused, but by the memory of a specific, unwavering posture, a physical commitment to a moment that never arrived. The balcony was her lookout, her chapel, and her prison, and now it is her monument. Widow's Overlook teaches a quiet lesson about the geography of grief. It shows that love can fossilize into a stance, a silhouette against the sky, forever watching an empty horizon. She simply is, a permanent part of the view, ensuring that anyone who looks up from the busy modern world below is reminded of a time when someone watched the sea not for beauty, but for a single, specific ship that sailed away and became, itself, a kind of ghost, forever anticipated on a balcony that never gives up its watch. Perched on the crumbling edge of a high sea cliff, the manor is a monument to both ambition and erosion. Built in an era of confidence. When the bluff seemed as solid as the foundation stones themselves. That confidence was shattered decades ago. When a massive section of the cliff face, taking the entire south garden with it, sheared away into the ocean below. The manor did not fall, but it was left in a state of permanent suspense. Its eastern wing now cantilevered over thin air, supported by a desperate lattice of iron and stone. The house is empty, owned by a trust that maintains its shell but forbids occupation. Visitors, usually historians or architects, are allowed inside under strict supervision. The moment they cross the threshold, they feel it. The floors, which appear level to the eye, are not. A marble dropped in the central hall will not rest. It will roll, slowly and silently, toward the eastern wall. It is not the dramatic tilt of a listing ship, but a quiet, persistent persuasion. This physical slope is accompanied by a more insidious sensation. Many who walk the rooms describe a feeling not just of sloping, but of being drawn. The pull seems to intensify. It is not a force on the body, but a suggestion in the mind. A magnetic curiosity that coaxes them closer to the edge. It feels like the house itself is leaning in, whispering an invitation to look. To step to the very brink of the towering windows and gaze down at the waves breaking on the rocks far below. The urge is quiet, rational even, but it builds with every moment spent inside. A structural engineer named Leo was hired to assess the manor's long-term stability. His laser levels and inclinometers confirmed the slope, a steady, unnerving declination of 2 degrees toward the void. But his instruments could not quantify the other feeling. As he worked alone in the grand drawing room, his focus on a hairline crack in the molding. He became aware of a deep, somatic pull. He felt compelled to walk to the enormous window. It was not fear or dizziness. It was a profound, almost welcoming attraction, as if the house was an old friend offering him the best view in the room. Later, in the library, the feeling returned, a silent, patient guidance toward the eastern shelves. He realized he was not resisting collapse. He was resisting an invitation. His historical research uncovered the manor's secret. It was not just a home. It was the life's work of a reclusive geologist and artist named Alastair Finch. Finch was obsessed with erosion, with the slow, beautiful dialogue between land and sea. He built the manor here to observe it. When the collapse happened, it did not devastate him. It fulfilled his morbid, profound thesis. He believed the house was now participating in the process, gracefully yielding to the inevitable. He spent his last years meticulously documenting the slant, even reinforcing the structure not to stop it, but to guide its slow, elegant surrender. Leo's final report was a masterpiece of engineering caution, recommending ongoing monitoring and eventual deconstruction. His personal conclusion was different. The slope was not just a result of the collapse. It was a continuation of it, a slow-motion slide that had become part of the house's identity. The feeling of being pulled was not paranormal. It was architectural. The house, through its every angled floorboard and shifted joist, was communicating its destiny. It was leaning into its own end, and it was inviting anyone inside to understand that perspective, to see the beauty in the inevitable fall. Leo never entered the manor again. He understood its language too well. He now knows why the trust keeps it empty. It is not because it is unsafe. It is because it is persuasive. Crumbling Edge Manor is not a dangerous building. It is a philosophy made of wood and stone. One that speaks of surrender to natural forces. And the slow, gentle pull toward its precipice is not a threat. But a shared secret, an offer to see the world from the brink of disappearance. Just as its creator did. To feel it is. To understand. That some structures. But to lean. Into their own. Conclusion. Fog Glass House stands isolated on a windswept hill, its weathered exterior framed by gnarled trees and low stone walls. The home is unremarkable by day, a modest structure of wood and glass, yet it harbors a mystery that transforms the surrounding landscape after dark or in shifting weather. Locals tell of sudden, thick fog rolling in around the house, swallowing the lawn, the trees, and the path leading to the road. The fog is dense and damp, carrying a quiet that is almost absolute, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of a bird. Visitors approaching the house often notice the fog materializing without warning. One moment the path is clear and visibility extends for dozens of yards. The next, mist swirls in dense sheets, reducing perception to a few feet and muffling ordinary sounds. The suddenness of its arrival has a disorienting effect, producing a sensation that the house itself has summoned the fog. Air becomes heavier, moisture clings to skin and clothing, and the familiar edges of landscape blur into soft gray. The most striking phenomenon occurs at the windows. Faces appear in the glass that do not belong to anyone inside. Expressions vary: curiosity, sorrow, even silent warning, but none correspond to any visitor, resident, or passerby. The faces are never static, they shift subtly in expression and position, appearing and vanishing as though caught between moments. Attempting to focus on one face often causes it to dissolve into the fog or distort, replaced by another presence in another pane. Those inside the house report the same phenomenon. Reflections appear in mirrors or windows, not of the room itself, but of people standing just out of sight. Observers feel watched, though nothing enters the room and no sound accompanies the reflection. The fog outside amplifies this effect, carrying light and shadow in ways that make perception unreliable, allowing shapes and faces to appear at the edge of vision before fading. Movement outside the windows is equally disorienting. Shadows drift along the fog, sometimes following the outline of a visitor or resident. The fog seems responsive, curling toward motion or shaping itself around obstacles. Observers describe a subtle pull in perception, a sense that the environment is attentive to presence and gesture. Walking around the house does not dispel the effect, it shifts with the observer, maintaining a continuity that defies ordinary explanation. The atmosphere is heightened by sound, or the absence of it. Fog muffles footsteps, wind, and distant noises. Ordinary sounds are absorbed or diffused, producing a hushed and isolating experience. The quiet allows perception to focus entirely on the visual phenomena: the faces in glass, the shifting shadows, and the pulsing thickness of the fog. Every creak of floorboards, rustle of leaves, or distant snap of a branch becomes amplified, contributing to the immersive sensation that the house is alive with observation. When the house is abandoned, the fog clears as suddenly as it arrives. Windows become ordinary again, reflections return to normal. And the air lightens. There is no lingering trace of the spectral activity, leaving only memory and accounts from those who witnessed the events. This sudden clearing reinforces the perception that the phenomena are tied directly to human presence. That the house and its fog respond to observation and occupancy. Time inside fog glass house seems altered. Moments stretch as attention is drawn to subtle movements and changes in light. Shadows drift imperceptibly, faces linger at the edge of perception, and the fog outside swirls with patterns that suggest intelligence or awareness. Observers often report losing track of ordinary measures of time, feeling that minutes and hours flow irregularly, influenced by the rhythm of the fog and the appearance of reflections. Even during the day, the house retains an atmosphere of tension. Fog may form in corners, reflections may appear in windows at angles that defy explanation. And shadows lengthen unnaturally. Observers feel a heightened sense of awareness, a focus on peripheral vision and subtle movement. The combination of environment, light, and presence creates a sensation of being observed while simultaneously observing. An immersive psychological and sensory experience. Describe a lasting impression. Lingers long after leaving. And the sense of presence. Accounts emphasize the fluidity of perception. And the impossibility of capturing the phenomenon with ordinary observation. Yet consistent in its impression of the house as a space of dynamic interaction. Fog glass house endures as a place where ordinary rules of perception are challenged. Fog rises and falls unpredictably, windows reflect faces that cannot be explained. The environment responds subtly to presence. Combining visual, tactile, and psychological elements to create a living landscape. Observers leave with a sense of awareness and wonder. The memory of a house that watches, that interacts, and that clears as mysteriously as it manifests. A reminder that some locations exist in a space between the known and the impossible. Perched on a grassy dune overlooking the endless gray sea, Saltwind Cottage appears to be a perfect, if lonely, retreat. Its white clapboard walls are bleached by the sun, and its shuttered windows face the rolling waves. But from the moment a visitor steps across its threshold, the cottage's true nature makes itself known. The air inside is saturated with the overwhelming, pervasive smell of the sea. It is not the fresh, briny scent of a beach, but a dense, humid, and ancient odor of salt, as if the very walls had been soaked in seawater for a century and never fully dried. This smell is constant and inescapable. It clings to curtains, permeates upholstery, and rises from the floorboards. Even with every window tightly sealed against the coastal air, the salt smell remains, undiminished. It is the cottage's first and most permanent impression. A sensory fact as solid as its stone foundation. As night deepens and the wind picks up outside, a second phenomenon begins. Visitors lying in the small bedrooms, or sitting in the low-ceilinged parlor, report hearing whispered conversations. The sound is not within the room, but seems to be carried through the walls, as if the cottage itself is a conduit. The whispers are layered and faint, a susurrus of many voices speaking at once. They are not angry or frightened, but conversational, the cadence reminiscent of sailors talking on a night watch, or of a family sharing stories in close quarters. The tone is intimate, urgent at times, and then fading into laughter or sighs. The words themselves are never clear, but the rhythm of human speech is unmistakable. Ebbing and flowing like the tide, carried on an unseen current through the plaster and lathe. The cottage was built by a retired Chesapeake carpenter, Elias Vance. After a lifetime at sea, he used timber salvaged from decommissioned sailing ships to construct his final home. The main beams are said to be from the clipper White Falcon, the floorboards from the supply schooner Martha Ray, and the interior paneling from various other vessels. He did not build it as a museum, but as a home, crafting every joint and shelf with the skill of a man who understood wood and wave. For him, the smell of salt was not an odor, but the scent of home. He often spoke of hearing the ships talk in the wind, a notion his neighbors dismissed as the fancy of an old sailor. After Elias passed, the cottage stood empty for long periods. New owners would arrive, paint the walls, install modern heating, and try to air the place out. But the salt smell always returned within days. The whispers began to be reported by these new occupants, often startling guests who knew nothing of the cottage's provenance. Scientific attempts to explain the phenomena are only partially successful. The salt smell could be attributed to capillary action, with salt crystals deep within the old timber migrating to the surface in the humid air, a process known as efflorescence. Yet, chemical washes and sealants have failed to eliminate it. The whispers present a greater puzzle. Acoustic surveys reveal no unusual wind channels in the walls. However, the specific density and grain of the salvaged ship timber, combined with the cottage's alignment to the prevailing winds, causes the structure to act as a giant resonator. The wind flowing over and around the cottage creates minute vibrations in the wood, which are translated into sound within the rooms. But those who hear the whispers swear they are more than random noise. The patterns are too social, too conversational. It is as if the memories absorbed by the timber, the countless conversations held in forecastles and captain's quarters, the plans, the jokes, the fears of men at sea are being gently replayed when the wind plays the cottage like a flute. To stay in Saltwind Cottage is to live inside a memory box built from ships. The salt smell is the taste of that memory. The whispers are its voice. You are not haunted by a single spirit, but by the collective echo of generations of sailors whose lives were poured into this wood. The cottage does not feel sad, but deeply occupied by the echoes of fellowship and shared journey. It is a place where the boundary between a house and a vessel is forever blurred. Where the walls do not keep the sea out, but lovingly preserve its essence. Allowing those within to hear, forever, the faint, woven echoes of the conversations of the sea, carried on the salt-laden wind. Perched on the very edge of a crumbling coastal bluff, there is a house with a porch that defies gravity. It is known locally as the listening porch. The house itself is abandoned, its structure sagging. But this one wooden porch extends bravely over the precipice. Supported by long, spindly pilings that descend into the fog and darkness below. To stand on it is to feel suspended between the solid land at your back and the sheer drop to the crashing waves. The boards creak with a different tone than those of the house, a hollow, echoing complaint that speaks of the void beneath your feet. By day, it is a place of breathtaking, if unnerving, views. But as night falls and the world simplifies into sound and shadow, the porch reveals its true nature. When the wind dies down and the tide is right, voices begin to rise from the abyss below the deck. They are not shouts, nor are they the roar of the surf. They are soft, clear voices, calling up from the darkness. They call names. The names are old-fashioned, like Cora, or Silas, or Benjamin. They are spoken with a tone of gentle summons, as if inviting someone to come closer, to lean over the railing. The voices are indistinct in source, seeming to emanate from the fog itself, from the rocks, from the air between the pilings. They overlap sometimes, a chorus of faint, polite calls rising on the salt-tinged air. The instinct, of course, is to listen. To try and make out the names, to understand. And this is where the porch exerts its strange influence. Those who stand and listen, who focus on the soft, beckoning calls, begin to experience a physical effect. A subtle dizziness starts at the base of the skull, a feeling of lightness, as if the solidity of the porch is dissolving. This progresses to a profound disorientation, a loss of balance and spatial awareness. The line between the solid porch and the empty air seems to blur. The voices, meanwhile, grow no louder, but feel closer, more personal, as if they are calling specifically to the listener. As if they are calling specifically to the listener. The urge to step back, to flee to the safety of the solid ground behind the house, becomes overwhelming. A survival impulse fighting against the mesmerizing pull of the sound. The history of this bluff is a ledger of loss. In the age of sail, this stretch of coast was a notorious ship killer, its rocks hidden by frequent fog. While no single disaster stands out, maritime records note numerous smaller vessels, schooners and fishing boats, that came to grief here over the decades. Many sailors were lost, their bodies often not recovered, claimed by the cold, deep water that churns at the base of the cliff. The porch, built later by a reclusive artist, inadvertently became a platform directly over a watery graveyard. This tragic history provides context for the phenomenon. Perhaps even the calls of seals or the peculiar groan of shifting rocks. A more compelling theory involves place memory. The concentrated energy of so many final moments. The last calls of sailors to each other as their ships foundered. May have imprinted upon the cove. The porch jutting directly over this space acts as a listening station. The voices are not ghosts but sonic fossils replaying fragments of those lost conversations. The dizziness experienced is not supernatural but a psychological and physiological response. To a terrifying cognitive dissonance hearing clear human voices calling from a place where no human could possibly be. The listening porch is a trap for attention. It offers a mystery, but exacts a physical toll for curiosity. To listen is to be drawn into their space. To feel the vertigo of their fall. To momentarily share the disorientation of their end. The porch does not threaten, it simply reveals. And in revealing, reminds the living of the thinness of the plank between solid ground and the deep, calling dark. It serves as a stark auditory memorial. There are no plaques, no carved stones. There is only this precarious wooden deck and the soft, rising voices after dark. They call not for help, but in recognition, a roll call of the lost that has become a permanent feature of the night air. A siren song of memory that asks only for a moment of your attention, and in return, gives you a dizzying glimpse into the silent history that lies just beneath your feet, and the fragile nature of your balance on the edge of the world. Built upon a windswept headland where the sea has claimed more than one garden. It is not the grandest of the cliff-top homes, but it is the most observant. Its windows are vast panes of glass facing the endless gray expanse of the ocean. The hall has been vacant for years. Cared for by a groundskeeper who comes by day, and leaves well before dusk. The caretaker's routine is precise. Each evening, he arranges the sparse furniture, ensuring every chair is pushed neatly against a wall, every small table is centered. And each morning, he finds things have been subtly rearranged. A heavy armchair has shifted a foot to the left. A reading lamp now sits at a different angle on its table. Most notably, the chairs, regardless of their weight, are always found facing the windows. Not haphazardly, but deliberately, as if placed to enjoy the view of the churning sea and the towering cliffs that flank the bay. The hall's most compelling evidence, however, is found on its dusty floors. The caretaker does not sweep them daily, allowing a fine, gray layer of coastal dust to settle. And in this dust, footprints appear. They are not the caretaker's. They are barefoot impressions, small and light, with a clear arch and toe. They never lead in from the main door. They begin in the center of a room, as if someone materialized there, and they walk, with a meandering but purposeful tread, across the floor. Their destination is always the same, the French doors that open onto a stone terrace at the very edge of the cliff. As if their maker stepped outside into the salt spray and wind. A conservator named Clara was hired to evaluate the Halla's artwork and fabrics for damage from the humid air. She was a practical woman, uninterested in local ghost stories. She decided to work late, alone, to take advantage of the quiet. Before leaving for the night, she meticulously documented the position of each piece of furniture with photographs and chalk marks on the floor. She even sifted a fine layer of fresh, white marble dust in the main gallery to capture any nocturnal activity. The next morning, the changes were undeniable. A chaise lounge she had positioned against the north wall was now angled toward the central window. Her chalk lines were unbroken, but the furniture had moved within them, as if turned on a pivot. In the white dust, a trail of footprints began near the fireplace. They wandered past the shifted chaise, paused at the window as if to look out. And then continued directly to the cliffside doors. The prints were delicate, detailed, and ended cleanly at the sill. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning fog. This was not vandalism. It was residence. That night, she remained, hidden in a Cervantes stairwell, a motion-activated camera pointed at the gallery. The footage showed nothing but darkness for hours. Then, in the pre-dawn gloom, the camera activated. It captured no figure, no shape. But in the grainy, gray image, the heavy chaise lounge was seen to rotate slowly, silently, a full 45 degrees to face the window, all by itself. Her research into the hall's history revealed a quiet tragedy. It was built for a retired sea captain's wife, Elara Voss, who loved the ocean but feared its power. She was a keen artist, a watcher of the horizon, and she became agoraphobic in her later years, unable to step beyond the terrace. Her greatest joy, and sorrow, was watching the ships come and go, and the constant, beautiful erosion of the cliffs she loved. She would sit for hours, her chair pulled close to the glass, her bare feet on the cool floor. Clara now believes Driftwood Hall is not haunted. It is keeping a vigil. The moving furniture is not mischievous, but dutiful. It is arranging the house for its primary occupant, setting the chairs for the best view of the sea, her only connection to the world. The footprints are not a haunting, but a habit, the memory of her nightly walks to the doors she could not bring herself to open, to feel the sea air on her face. The house is not remembering a person. It is remembering a routine of longing, a ritual of observation. Clara completed her conservation report, noting the need for climate control. She never mentioned the dust. She understands now why the groundskeeper does his work with such quiet respect. He is not cleaning a haunted house. He is preparing a viewing room. Each night, Driftwood Hall sets itself for its watcher, arranging the chairs, and tracing the path to the edge, so that a memory of love and loss can continue its eternal watch over the restless, gray sea. Stormcall House sits perched atop a windswept hill, its weathered walls darkened by years of exposure to the elements. The home has long been abandoned, its windows boarded or broken. And the surrounding landscape is rugged, marked by twisted trees and rocky soil. Yet during storms, the house transforms. Locals report that lightning illuminates figures in the windows. Fleeting silhouettes that vanish almost instantly as thunder roars across the hills. Observers approaching the house during calm weather note its stillness and decay. Wooden beams sag, shingles are missing, and vines creep across walls and fences. But when dark clouds gather and wind drives rain across the hill, it takes on an uncanny presence. Flickering lights appear behind broken glass, shimmering without source, as though the structure itself responds to the storm. The phenomenon is tied closely to lightning. Each strike produces a brief, intense illumination, revealing interior shapes that could be mistaken for shadows or debris. But witnesses insist the figures are humanoid, moving slowly or standing motionless in ways that defy ordinary reflection. The effect is fleeting. In the next instant, the lightning fades and the shapes vanish, leaving only darkness and the sound of wind and rain. Sound amplifies the experience. Rain slaps against roofs and walls, wind whistles through broken eaves, and distant thunder reverberates through the valley. The figures in the windows appear synchronized with these natural cues, emerging with flashes of lightning and retreating with the rumble of thunder. Observers often report a sense of being watched, a heightened awareness that persists even after the storm passes. Locals avoid the area entirely during bad weather. Tales circulate of hikers, photographers, and storm chasers who approached Stormcall House seeking documentation, only to retreat with stories of intense unease. The combination of wind, rain, lightning, and fleeting figures produces an environment that is both disorienting and immersive. Peripheral vision seems to detect movement constantly, yet turning toward it reveals only empty space. Even from a safe distance, the house exerts influence. The repetition of this pattern creates a rhythm. A sense that the storm and the house are interacting, with observers, drawing attention to specific points of light and shadow, yet remaining untouchable and mysterious. Weather patterns enhance perception. Fog rolling in with rain softens edges and blurs distance, making shapes appear and disappear unpredictably. Branches sway and creak, adding subtle auditory cues to the visual phenomena. The house seems alive in these moments, a focal point where storm, landscape, and human attention converge into an experience that is both unsettling and mesmerizing. Psychological effects are profound. Observers report increased heart rate, heightened senses, and a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Lightning flashes, wind, and rain create unpredictable patterns, making the fleeting figures seem more real. The mind attempts to track movement, to find patterns, yet the shapes defy consistent interpretation. The house becomes a test of perception, a place where ordinary understanding of space, light, and movement is challenged. Stormcall House's influence extends beyond the immediate weather. The flicker of figures in windows, and the soundscape of wind and rain, maintaining its presence in mind and memory. The architecture of the house contributes to the phenomenon. Multiple windows on each side allow for repeated flashes of interior space during lightning. creating a dynamic interplay of light and shadow. Broken boards, reflective glass, and uneven surfaces produce distortions that enhance the illusion of movement. Yet the effect is consistent across witnesses, suggesting that the phenomenon is not purely optical, but connected to timing, environment, and human perception. Visitors describe a blend of awe and caution. The fleeting figures are neither threatening nor aggressive. But the intensity of the experience is enough to compel retreat. The house during storms becomes a space where natural and psychological forces merge. Where light, shadow, sound, and perception are heightened in a continuous interaction. Observers leave with a strong impression that the home is attentive, aware, and intertwined with the storms themselves. Stormcall House endures as a place of fascination and mystery. Lightning illuminates figures that cannot be explained. Wind and rain amplify perception, and the environment reinforces a sense of presence that transcends ordinary observation, creating a unique experience during each storm. Visitors depart with the memory of fleeting silhouettes, flickering light, and the knowledge that some places are shaped not just by construction, but by interaction with nature and the perception of those who witness them. On a high and windswept cliff overlooking a restless sea stands a solitary structure known as the Narrow Stair Home. It is a modest, two-story cottage built from local stone, its back pressed against the landward side, its front facing the vast, empty horizon. The home's most distinctive feature is not the view, but its access. A steep, narrow, and entirely separate staircase is carved from the rock itself, leading from a small cove below directly up to the home's side door. This is not a welcoming entrance. It is a difficult, almost vertical climb, a functional path for a very specific purpose, worn smooth by weather and time. The house is quiet by day, filled with the sound of gulls and distant waves. But at night, when the wind dies down and the world holds its breath, the old staircase awakens. The sound begins at the bottom, down where the stone meets the dark water of the cove. It is the clear, unmistakable sound of a footfall on wet stone. Then another. A slow, labored, and deliberate climb begins. The steps are heavy, as if the climber is tired or burdened. They are measured, one after the other, echoing off the rock face as they ascend. The climb takes several minutes. The footsteps do not enter. They climb the entire length of the staircase, until they reach the small, wooden landing just outside the home's side entrance. There, they stop. A profound silence follows, a silence that feels like waiting, like presence. They pause just outside the bedroom door that adjoins the landing. A door that is always locked from the inside by any occupant. After a long moment, the sound simply ceases. There is no descent, no returning footsteps down the cliff. The approach is made, the vigil is kept, and then, nothing. The home was built by a lighthouse keeper named Silas, who manned the now ruined tower on the adjacent point. The staircase was his private route, allowing him to check on the cove for distressed boats during storms without taking the longer inland path. His wife, Elara, was an invalid in her later years, confined to the bedroom that shared a wall with the landing. Silas would climb the stairs every few hours during the night to listen at her door, to ensure she was resting peacefully, before returning to his duties at the tower. His was a life of constant, quiet vigilance, measured in steps taken between his two charges, the sea and his wife. The night the old lighthouse lamp finally failed during a savage gale, Silas was at the tower, fighting the mechanism. Elara, terrified by the storm and the sudden darkness, tried to reach the side door to call for him. She never made it. She was found at the base of the narrow stairs the next morning. Silas, shattered by guilt and grief, left the cliff forever, but the rhythm of his watch, it seems, did not. Modern occupants, seeking solitude, are the ones who most consistently report the phenomenon. The sounds are not recorded by digital devices, which pick up only ambient noise. But to the human ear, they are crisp and real. Vibration sensors placed on the stairs have detected subtle, rhythmic pressure, but it does not match the pattern of known seismic activity or animal movement. The locked bedroom door often feels inexplicably cold to the touch on nights when the footsteps are heard. To spend a night in the narrow stair home is to become part of a silent vigil. You lie in the dark, listening to the sea. And then you hear it, the slow, ascending climb from the cove. Your mind races, imagining who, or what, could be out there on that treacherous path in the dead of night. The approach is agonizingly slow, a drawn-out suspense that culminates not in a crash or an entry, but in that still, listening silence just beyond the door. It is a haunting defined by absence and routine. The footsteps are not a threat, but a duty. He is not climbing to frighten, but to check, to listen, to stand guard. The staircase is not a path for the living anymore, but a track worn into the memory of the stone itself, replaying a journey of care and concern that now ends eternally, just outside a door he can never bring himself to open. Standing guard over a silence he can no longer breach. At the end of a quiet, tree-lined street stands a house frozen in a moment of violence. It is a fine, two-story Victorian, but its most striking feature is the second-floor balcony. The ornate wooden railing is shattered. A gaping section in the center is simply gone, leaving jagged splinters of white pine pointing outward like broken bones. The rest of the railing is intact, but the house has never been repaired. The damage is the defining feature, a wound that has been left open. The house is empty, owned by an estate that refuses to sell or restore it. Visitors, usually urban explorers or curious neighbors, report that the interior is dusty but otherwise ordinary, save for the door that leads to the balcony. That door is always unlocked. Stepping onto the balcony floor is to enter the domain of the break. The view is pleasant, overlooking the back garden and a distant line of hills. But the jagged hole in the railing dominates the space, a silent scream in the architecture. It is here, on this balcony, that the auditory phenomenon occurs. When the air is still, often in the late afternoon or early evening, visitors hear the sound of splintering wood. It is not a single crack, but a rapid, violent series of pops and rips, the sound of strong timber giving way under immense pressure. The sound is sharp, close, and unmistakable. It seems to come from the very spot where the railing is broken, as if the moment of its destruction is replaying itself in the air. There is no accompanying crash, no cry, just the brutal, final sound of something breaking. This sound alone is unsettling. But for some visitors, the experience becomes tactile. They report a distinct physical sensation while standing near the broken edge. It begins as a pressure, a firm, insistent push against the back or shoulders. The feeling is not aggressive, but deliberate and unervingly strong. It is the sensation of hands pressing, guiding them gently but firmly toward the gap in the railing. The push is never violent enough to cause a loss of balance, but it is unequivocally directed, a silent urging toward the void. This sensation triggers an immediate and visceral panic, a fight-or-flight response that sends people stumbling back into the safety of the house, their hearts pounding. The history of the house is a quiet tragedy. In the 1920s, it was home to a respected doctor and his wife, Eleanor. By all accounts, they were a happy couple. The doctor was a keen stargazer, and he would often take his telescope onto the balcony. One autumn night, while adjusting the heavy brass instrument, he lost his balance. He fell against the railing. Whether the wood was rotten or the force was simply too great, the railing gave way. He fell to the garden below and died instantly. Eleanor, who witnessed the accident from the bedroom window, was devastated. She left the house within the week, instructing in her will that the balcony never be repaired. as if to preserve the exact conditions of her husband's final moment. A monument to accident. This history is the key to understanding the phenomenon. Parapsychologists often speak of traumatic imprints, where the energy of a sudden, violent event becomes trapped in a location. The broken rail house is a perfect vessel. The sound of splintering wood is a literal echo of the catastrophe, a sonic snapshot. The sensation of being pushed, however, is more complex and subjective. It is unlikely to be a spectral attempt to harm. A more compelling interpretation is that it is a form of empathetic resonance. Visitors standing on the balcony are unconsciously placing themselves in the doctor's last physical space. The feeling of pressure could be a psychosomatic echo of his own momentum, his body's interaction with the railing, perceived by a sensitive visitor as an external force. It is not a ghost pushing you, but the memory of a push, of a body in motion against the wood, bleeding into the present. The house, therefore, is not haunted by a malevolent spirit, but by a physics of grief. Eleanor's refusal to fix the railing froze the house in the instant of loss. The balcony is not a place, it is a moment. To stand there is to stand inside that moment. The sound of breaking is its soundtrack. The feeling of pressure is its momentum. It is a stark lesson in how tragedy can fracture not just wood, but the very atmosphere of a place, leaving behind an echo that engages not just the ears, but the deepest, most primal sense of the body, a gentle, terrible push from the past toward a broken edge that never heals. Perched high above a secluded, mirror-still bay, Moonwake House is a study in silver and shadow. Its architecture is all sharp angles and vast glass, designed not for the sun, but for the night. The bay below acts as a perfect natural reflector, catching the moonlight and amplifying it, casting a brilliant, liquid silver path that leads directly to the house's foundation. On nights of the full moon, the effect is breathtaking, flooding the interior with a cold, clear radiance that renders electric light pale and unnecessary. But the moonlight here does not behave as it should. Inside the house, shadows do not simply fall. They stretch. A chair will cast a slender, elongated silhouette that climbs the far wall, bending as if the light source is not the moon in the sky, but something much closer, much lower. Doorframes project thin, distorted lines that seem to reach for the opposite side of the room. It is a world of exaggerated, dreamlike geometry, where the normal rules of perspective are rewritten by the reflected glow. Within this stretched and silvered landscape, the figures appear. They are not seen moving. They are simply present, standing in patches of the most intense moonlight, often near the windows or in the center of an empty room. They are observers, frozen in the act of watching the moon's path on the water. An optical physicist named Silas was drawn to Moonwake House after hearing persistent rumors. His interest was in the unique reflective properties of the bay and the potential for measured light amplification. He secured permission to study the phenomenon during a lunar cycle, setting up light meters and cameras throughout the empty home. His instruments confirmed the anomaly. The moonlight inside was significantly brighter and more diffuse than direct moonlight should have been, as if scattered by an invisible lens in the atmosphere. The shadow stretching, however, defied his models. The angles were impossible, suggesting multiple, conflicting light sources that his equipment could not detect. During the peak of the full moon, Silas stood in the great room, his instruments humming softly. He watched as the shadow of a simple vase elongated, crawling up the wall like a growing vine. Then he saw the first figure. It was standing by the far window, a tall, slender silhouette immersed in a pool of silver. A second appeared near the hallway, a shorter, stockier shape. They were utterly still. He moved cautiously, changing his vantage point. The figures did not turn, did not react. They were fixed elements in the luminous architecture of the room. Silas felt no fear, but a profound sense of dislocation. He was not witnessing an apparition. He was witnessing an effect, a byproduct of the light itself. He spent the following weeks researching not ghost stories, but the history of the land. He discovered that the bay was once a sacred site for a coastal people who tracked the moon's phases for navigation and ceremony. The promontory where the house now stood was their primary watching place, a calendar carved from landscape and light. His theory is this. Moonwake House sits atop a natural lunar observatory. The specific alignment of the bay, the promontory, and the path of the moon creates a perfect, focused reflection. That does more than illuminate. The stretched shadows are not distortions, but accurate recordings of light. From angles that no longer exist, from times when the sea level was different, or the cliff face was another shape. The figures are not ghosts of people. They are shadows of the watchers themselves. Cast by moonlight from centuries past and preserved in the unique photonic memory of the place. They are fossilized observation, a permanent record of attendance. Silas published a dry paper on anomalous lunar reflectance in sheltered marine environments. His personal notes contain the real discovery. He understands now why the house, for all its beauty, has never been a home. It is not a dwelling. It is a camera obscura. It does not capture images on film, but in light and shadow. On certain nights, it develops the pictures stored in its stones and its view. Developing the silhouettes of all those who have ever stood in that spot. Watching the same moon pull the same tide. Bound together not by time, but by the simple, eternal act of looking. The locked window residence stands alone on a cliffside overlooking restless waters. Its exterior is solid and unyielding, windows tightly sealed and shutters locked for decades. The house appears ordinary by day, a weathered structure of stone and wood. Yet visitors report a profound strangeness upon entering. Cold air flows through the rooms, moving in currents that defy ordinary explanation. Despite the closed windows, drafts wander hallways, brushing skin and chilling bones with a presence that is palpable but unseen. The house has been empty for years, yet it seems attentive to movement and sound. Knocking emanates from the glass facing the water. Observers describe the sound as deliberate, rhythmic, and unhurried. Distinct from the ordinary creaks and groans of a building settling in the wind. The knockings vary in intensity, sometimes gentle, almost tentative, at other times louder, echoing through the empty rooms. They occur at all hours, independent of weather or human activity, but are most pronounced in the quiet of dawn or during storms. The interior amplifies sensation. Hallways, narrow and dimly lit by natural light filtering through layers of grime, carry sound clearly. Each knock resonates through walls, bouncing off corners and floors, producing reverberations that make the space feel both intimate and vast. Observers often pause, listening for patterns, attempting to locate the source. Yet the sound always seems to originate from the glass itself, and yet from nowhere at all. Temperature fluctuations heighten the experience. The cold air moves unpredictably, pooling in corners and rising along walls. Visitors feel it shift against their bodies, sometimes brushing across hands or necks, yet no current is detectable from windows, doors, or vents. The draft seems purposeful, guiding attention toward the water-facing glass, aligning perception with the knocks. Hikers, storm chasers, and curious explorers often describe a simultaneous sense of unease and fascination, drawn toward the windows while instinct urges caution. The view outside the locked windows is a constant presence. Waves crash against the cliff below, wind lifts spray into the air, and seabirds circle in patterns. At times, faint reflections appear in the glass, shifting shapes that seem too subtle and irregular to be merely human perception. Shadows from the cliffs and clouds play across the panes, but these movements are distinct from the deliberate knocking that occurs within. Observers describe the interplay between exterior motion and interior sound as unsettling, a dialogue between the house and the water beyond. The building itself responds in subtle ways. Floorboards shift beneath weight, doors creak slightly without contact. And glass trembles faintly during knocks. The timing suggests synchronicity, a connection between perception and environment. That the house is aware of their presence, that the knocking and drafts are attuned to attention. It is impossible to predict patterns, repetition exists, but never exact replication. Each experience is unique, shaped by presence, weather, and perception. Fog and storms intensify the phenomenon. Mist rolling in from the water obscures vision, softening edges and blending the cliffside with the horizon. Rain hammers the roof and glass, producing a percussive counterpoint to the knocking. The combination of cold air, fog, and weather amplifies perception, making the interior appear more expansive and the glass more alive. Shadows lengthen and distort, further heightening the sense that the building itself is participating in observation, shaping experience through sound, draft, and light. Psychological effects are pronounced. Visitors report increased awareness of space, heightened sensitivity to touch and sound, and a growing anticipation of each knock. Time feels altered. Minutes stretch as attention focuses on the interplay of draft, knock, and reflection. Some describe the sensation of being followed or watched. A subtle presence moving unseen through the rooms. Attuned to movement and posture. The house produces a continuous tension, blending curiosity, anxiety, and wonder into a singular experience. Even when leaving, the impression lingers. The memory of knocking from the glass. The cold air moving against skin. And the strange sense of presence persists. Observers describe auditory and tactile memory, sensing the house's rhythm and peripheral awareness long after departing. The phenomenon defies conventional explanation, anchored in the architecture, location, and environmental conditions. Yet experienced subjectively, intensely, and vividly. The locked window residence endures as a site of perceptual mystery. Closed windows fail to contain sound or air. Knocks echo without source. And cold drafts navigate space independently. The house maintains a dialogue with the observer, blending sound, temperature, and perception into a complex, immersive experience. Visitors leave with a lasting impression of a building that is both physical and animate. A home shaped by isolation, water, and attention. Challenging the boundaries of ordinary observation and leaving memory haunted by what cannot be seen, only felt. On the very edge of a sheer coastal cliff stands Whisper Cliff House. It is an elegant, if neglected, structure built by a maritime cartographer over a century ago. Its most remarkable feature is a grand, glass-walled observatory that juts precariously over the drop, designed for unimpeded observation of the sea. The house is always filled with sound, but not the sound of the wind or the gulls. From the moment one enters, a soft chorus of whispers permeates every room. They are layered, gentle, and incessant, like the distant murmur of a crowd heard through a wall. The whispers are not random. They speak of the tide. The phrases are simple, repetitive, and concerned with measurement and timing. The tide is turning. The water is 3 fathoms deep. The current pulls east. High water in the 7th hour. They are spoken in a mix of male and female voices, some young, some old, all with the calm, factual tone of someone reporting data. It is a ceaseless, soft recitation of maritime observations. A broadcasting from within the walls. The phenomenon's most chilling aspect is its correlation to the sea itself. The whispers are a constant background murmur. But as the actual tide outside begins to rise, climbing the cliffs below, the voices in the house grow correspondingly louder. Their phrases become slightly more urgent. By the time high tide peaks, the whispers are clearly audible. No longer a background noise but a pervasive presence. As if the observers are standing just behind your shoulder, intently reporting the encroaching water. When the tide recedes, the voices slowly diminish back to their original, soft murmur. The house was built by Alastair Reed, a man obsessed with mapping the treacherous coastal currents. He lived there with his wife and 2 grown children, all of whom shared his passion. They maintained a meticulous, round-the-clock watch, calling out observations to each other from different rooms. Noting the tide's behavior on slates and charts, their life was a symphony of dedicated vigilance. Their conversations a constant stream of tidal facts and figures. Tragedy struck not from the sea, but from within. A fever swept through the household, a swift and brutal illness. That took Alastair's wife and daughter in the same week. Stricken with grief, Alastair and his son retreated further into their work. Their observations becoming a lifeline, a way to cope with the silence left behind. Alastair's son eventually left, unable to bear the sorrowful routine. The old man continued alone. Until his own death. His final words said to be a whispered note on the state of the tide. The whispers began shortly after the house was emptied. New owners, unaware of its history, were the first to report the unsettling, knowledgeable murmur. Scientists have investigated extensively. The house's unique position and construction act as a massive resonance chamber for the sound of the sea below. Specific frequencies from waves crashing into caves at the cliff's base are amplified and shaped by the homea's geometry. Linguists and audio engineers agree the resulting sounds can have a phonemic quality, a breathy, sibilant noise that the pattern-seeking human brain interprets as whispered speech. Yet, the content of the phrases, their direct correlation to the tidal clock, and the increase in volume with the rising water defies simple acoustics. It is as if the house learned the family's language and now repeats it, using the energy of the very sea they watched so closely. To stay in Whisper Cliff House is to be immersed in a memory of watchfulness. You are not living in a home, but inside a dedicated mind. The whispers are not frightening, but deeply solemn, a residual record of a familia's shared purpose. As the tide rises and the voices swell, you are drawn into their ancient ritual. You find yourself looking out the observatory windows, checking the water level against the reports in the air. The house turns you into a participant in its eternal vigil. It does not haunt with malice, but with profound, ingrained habit. Forever monitoring the sea. Forever whispering its findings into the empty rooms. Ensuring that the watch, like the tide, never truly ends. At the edge of a quiet coastal town, where the land begins to soften into salt marsh before meeting the bay, there is a structure known as the Slanting House. It is a modest, 2-story cottage, clad in weathered gray shingles. From a distance, it appears picturesque. But as you draw nearer, a subtle wrongness asserts itself. The entire house leans. It does not list dramatically like a ship in distress, but tilts with a gentle, persistent inclination toward the water. The angle is just enough to be unmistakable, a permanent bow to the bay. The cause is geological. Engineers have surveyed it, declaring it stable in its imbalance, a slow-motion slide arrested by a deeper layer of bedrock. It is not in immediate danger of collapse, but it has settled into its tilt as a permanent state of being. The windows and doors are slightly rhomboid, the floors an exercise in subtle, constant adjustment. Stepping inside is where the phenomenon moves from visual curiosity to visceral experience. Visitors immediately report a feeling of being unbalanced. It is not the dizziness of height, but a deep, internal disorientation, as if the body's own internal gyroscope is struggling to reconcile with the skewed world. Walking across the living room floor requires unexpected muscular corrections. A ball placed on the floor will not stay still but will roll with a slow, determined insistence toward the far wall, the one closest to the water. The sensation is quietly, persistently unsettling. This feeling does not subside with familiarity. In fact, the longer a person stays inside the slanting house, the worse the sensation becomes. A short visit might produce mild unease. But those who linger for an hour or more describe a growing sense of cognitive dissonance. The mind fights to square the visible slant of the walls and floors with the ingrained expectation of right angles and level planes. This conflict manifests physically as a low-grade nausea, a headache centered behind the eyes, and a profound sense of instability that feels emotional as much as physical. The house seems to pull not just toward the bay, but on the occupant's very sense of equilibrium. The urge to escape, to stand on the firm, flat ground outside, becomes overwhelming. The history of the house adds a layer of narrative to the physical anomaly. He wanted a view of the water he had spent his life crossing. Uneasy on steady land. Neighbors said he was a man drawn to the sea with a powerful, almost magnetic attraction, uneasy on steady land. Those who later lived in it, even before the noticeable tilt began, spoke of a strange longing they felt within its walls. A restless urge to look out the windows toward the horizon. The house's gradual lean seems to have physically manifested the captain's lifelong pull toward the bay. This history suggests the disorientation is more than a simple vestibular conflict. The house is not just slanted, it is oriented, its entire being directed toward the water. To be inside is to be subjected to that singular, physical yearning. The body's discomfort is a reaction to being immersed in a structure that embodies a profound, directional longing. The worsening sensation over time is the mind and body slowly absorbing the house's relentless, gravitational pull towards something it can never truly reach. The slanting house is a lesson in subtle, persistent force. It demonstrates how a physical flaw can become a psychological experience. It is not haunted by a ghost, but by a vector, a direction. The tilt is a silent, slow-motion lunge toward the bay that was decades in the making. Visitors do not just see a leaning house, they feel its aspiration, its incomplete topple, and their own biology rebels against living inside an unfulfilled desire made of wood and shingle. It stands as a monument to a specific kind of longing, made literal in its architecture. To enter is to temporarily share the captain's restless orientation. To feel the world tip ever so slightly toward the vast, blue unknown. And to understand that some homes are built not for comfort, but to echo a deep and unshakable call. One that slowly, surely, draws everything within its walls toward the edge. And to understand that some homes are built not for comfort, but to echo a deep and unshakable call. One that slowly, surely, draws everything within its walls toward the edge. One that slowly, surely, draws everything within its walls toward the edge. Perched on a high, windswept bluff overlooking a forgotten port, Lantern Bluff Home stands as a silent sentinel. It is a large, austere structure of gray stone and timber, built in an era when light was a precious commodity. Its most distinctive architectural feature lines the interior halls and the vast, wraparound porch. Dozens of old iron lantern hooks, black with age and rust, are anchored to the walls and support beams. They are simple, sturdy curves of metal, waiting for a lantern to be hung. But no lantern has been placed there in living memory. The house has been meticulously preserved as a historical site, empty of furniture but full of echoing space. By day, the hooks are merely relics, points of interest on a guided tour. But after sunset, when the last visitor has left and the caretaker has locked the gates, a softer history asserts itself. As true darkness settles over the bluff, faint lights begin to glow upon the hooks. They are not the bright, steady flames of real lanterns. They are dim, hazy spheres of light, the color of warm amber seen through frosted glass. They appear one by one, each hovering just above its hook, illuminating the metal with a soft, ethereal halo. They cast a gentle, ambient light that pushes back the deep shadows of the empty rooms and porch, creating a scene of quiet, ghostly occupancy. The light is just enough to suggest a path, to outline a doorway, but never enough to reveal detail. The behavior of these lights is consistent, and deeply paradoxical. If someone were to approach one, perhaps drawn by its gentle glow, the light reacts. It does not vanish instantly, but dims gradually, like a candle being slowly smothered. By the time the observer is within arm's reach of the hook, the light has faded to a mere afterimage on the retina, then nothing at all. The other lights in the vicinity may dim in sympathy, as if a respectful silence is falling. Only when the intruder retreats, and stillness returns, do the lights slowly kindle back to life, resuming their silent, stationary vigil. A historian named Felix was compiling an inventory of the home's architectural details. He arranged to stay on site for a week, sleeping in the caretaker's cottage but working in the main house until late. On his first evening, engrossed in sketching the ironwork, he failed to notice the sunset. When he finally looked up, he saw them, a dozen softly glowing points along the long hallway. The air was cool and still, smelling of old wood and dust, but the light felt warm, inviting even. He stood and walked slowly toward the nearest one. As he did, the light began to fade. It was not a flicker, but a smooth, controlled diminishment, like a thought being withdrawn. He took another step. It faded further, until only the memory of its shape remained. A profound sense of trespass washed over him. He was not being threatened. He was being asked to keep his distance. Felix spent the rest of his stay observing, never approaching the lights directly again. He noted they appeared in a specific sequence, from the back of the house toward the front porch, as if someone was walking through, lighting their way. Their placement was practical, illuminating steps, turns, and doorways. His research uncovered the home's original purpose. It was not a family residence. It was a watch house and a place of refuge, maintained by a charitable guild for the benefit of sailors' families. The keeper's sole duty was light. As night fell, they would walk the halls and the porch, hanging lit lanterns on every hook. A beacon of guidance for ships seeking the port and a symbol of welcome for those waiting ashore. The light was not for the keeper, but for others. It was a self-effacing task, the opposite of a display. Felix now believes the glowing hooks are not haunted. They are loyal. They are repeating the ritual of preparation, lighting the house for its purpose. The fading is not a trick, but an inherent part of that ritual. The light was never meant to be examined or possessed. It was meant to be seen from a distance, to offer guidance, not scrutiny. To approach it is to misunderstand its nature, to turn a public beacon into a private curiosity, and so, it politely extinguishes itself. Felix completed his inventory, noting the exquisite craftsmanship of the iron hooks. He understands now why the caretaker never enters the main house after dark. It is not out of fear, but out of respect for the schedule. Lantern Bluff Home is still keeping its watch, performing its ancient, generous duty. And the soft, fading lights are a reminder that some kindnesses are meant to be observed from afar, a welcoming glow that asks only that you do not come too close, and in doing so, allow its work to continue, uninterrupted, through the long night. Its FAA section is simple and unassuming, yet it exudes an unease that draws attention before any details are noticed. Daylight glints off glass panes. But the windows betray more than mere reflection. Visitors report a sensation of being observed, a constant awareness that persists no matter where they stand. The effect is subtle at first, a feeling that eyes linger on them even when no one is visible. As observers move along the property, reflections in the windows do not perfectly align with reality. Movements appear a moment too late, creating a dissonance between action and mirrored image. A hand raised is mirrored after a brief pause, a step forward reflected after already completed. This temporal lag is unnerving, producing a perception that the windows themselves are alive, interpreting movement and replaying it with delay. At times, reflections display expressions that do not belong to any person present. A smile appears briefly on a mirrored face, subtle yet distinct, when the actual observer is neutral or tense. These anomalies are fleeting, often caught only in peripheral vision. Direct focus can cause the image to distort, dissolve, or shift to another plane, as if the windows respond to attention. The experience is deeply immersive, combining visual distortion, delayed reaction, and the impression of sentience. The building itself enhances the effect. Multiple windows at varying angles create layers of reflection, overlapping views, and compounded distortions. Light interacts unpredictably with glass, producing highlights and shadows that amplify the illusion of movement. Observers report that as they walk past, the reflections seem to track them independently, maintaining alignment even as perspectives change. Peripheral shapes sometimes appear as figures beyond the glass, but when approached, reveal only empty space. Even on overcast days, the phenomenon persists. Shadows shift with clouds, changing the intensity of reflections, and making faces appear and disappear. The subtle variations in light exaggerate the delay in mirrored movement, heightening the perception that the windows observe with intent. The building, glass, and environmental light work together to create an experience that is both familiar and uncanny, drawing attention to ordinary motion while altering perception. Sound and atmosphere contribute to tension. Footsteps on pavement, rustling leaves, and distant traffic are absorbed and diffused by the building and its surroundings, producing a hushed environment. The muted auditory space allows visual anomalies to dominate perception. Observers often report a simultaneous feeling of fascination and caution, compelled to continue moving while aware of the dissonance in reflections. Observers often report a simultaneous feeling of fascination and caution, compelled to continue moving while aware of the dissonance in reflections. Psychological effects are notable. The delayed movements and anomalous expressions induce heightened alertness. Visitors feel their senses stretched, as the brain attempts to reconcile reality with mirrored distortions. Peripheral awareness becomes acute, and ordinary patterns of movement feel uncertain. This interplay of observation and delayed reflection produces a continuous tension, maintaining focus and engagement while introducing a subtle unease. Repeated observation reinforces the phenomenon. Multiple passes past the windows yield consistent experiences. Temporal lag in reflections, anomalous expressions, and a pervasive sense of observation. No matter where an observer stands, the feeling of being watched persists. The windows respond, in a sense, to motion and attention, maintaining an elusive, unpredictable quality that defies ordinary explanation. Night alters perception further. Streetlights, passing vehicles, and interior lights produce new angles of reflection. Shadows deepen and merge, causing reflections to fragment and distort. Faces appear to emerge from darkness, fleeting and partial, often accompanied by a sensation of presence beyond the glass. Observers describe the interplay of light and reflection as almost conscious, enhancing the immersive quality of the experience. The watching windows is not merely visual. Engages touch, space, and proprioception, subtly influencing movement. Visitors instinctively alter pace and posture, reacting to perceived attention from the glass. Even without conscious focus, the windows seem to shape perception, guiding the eye and influencing awareness. Observers leave with a sense that the house is attentive, responsive, and alive in an unusual, subtle way. Memory preserves the effect. Even after leaving, reflections, delayed movements, and anomalous expressions replay in imagination. Observers carry the sensation of being watched, a persistent awareness of presence that exists beyond physical proximity. The experience demonstrates how environment, perception, and subtle anomalies interact to produce an immersive, enduring impression. The watching windows endures as a site of mystery. Glass reflects delayed motion, expressions appear when none are present. Observers feel continuously observed. Light, angle, and architecture combine to create a sensory experience that is compelling and unsettling. Each visit provides a unique encounter. Yet the fundamental phenomena remain consistent, leaving a lasting impression of a place where perception, reflection, and attention converge, and where ordinary observation is transformed into a deeply immersive experience. On a dramatic promontory overlooking the restless ocean stands the tidal memory house. The house is a sturdy, stone-built cottage, seemingly fused with the very cliff it crowns. Its most remarkable feature is not its architecture, but its profound and unsettling connection to the water below. The house does not merely observe the tide, it physically and audibly reacts to it, becoming a living instrument of the sea's rhythm. The cycle begins at low tide. When the water retreats, revealing a stark landscape of jagged rocks and deep, water-filled clefts at the base of the cliff, the sounds emerge. They are loud, percussive bangs, like the slam of a heavy door or the strike of a great hammer against wood. The noises echo upward, sharp and clear, resonating through the stone foundations of the house. They are sporadic but forceful, creating the distinct impression of frantic, mechanical activity happening in the exposed caverns below. As the tide begins its slow, inevitable rise, a transformation occurs. The sharp banging sounds diminish. In their place, a new auditory layer surfaces. These are muffled, human-like cries. They are not screams of terror, but sounds of struggle, exertion, and desperate effort. As if heard from behind a thick wall or beneath a blanket of water. The cries are layered with the gurgle and hiss of the incoming sea, growing more frequent and more distressed as the water level climbs. Concurrent with this auditory shift is a physical sensation. The house itself begins to vibrate. It is a subtle, deep tremor, felt in the floorboards and the stone walls. A faint humming thrum that is in perfect sync with the surge of the waves against the cliff face. The very structure seems to be breathing with the ocean, expanding and contracting minutely with the hydraulic pressure of the rising tide. A faint humming thrum that is in perfect sync with the surge of the waves against the cliff face. The very structure seems to be breathing with the ocean, expanding and contracting minutely with the hydraulic pressure of the rising tide. A century ago, a daring entrepreneur constructed a clandestine boatworks in the sea caves directly beneath the house. It was a perfect hiding place from taxmen and competitors, accessible only at the lowest tides. Workers would toil furiously during the brief windows of exposure, hammering and sawing, building small, fast craft. The house above served as the foreman's lookout and office. The disaster was a matter of poor timing. A crew was trapped by a tide that rose faster than predicted due to an offshore storm. Their frantic attempts to batter through a secondary, weaker wall with their tools produced the final, desperate bangs. The rising water quickly silenced their efforts. The cave and its tragic workshop were sealed forever by a subsequent rockfall, but the memory of those final moments seems to have saturated the stone. Geologists confirm the cliff is honeycombed with unstable caves and fissures. The banging sounds at low tide are likely rocks, shifted by the release of water pressure, tumbling and striking each other in the newly air-filled chambers. The muffled cries could be the sound of air and water being forced through narrow, resonant blowholes as the tide fills the caves. The vibration is a straightforward transmission of wave energy through the sedimentary rock. Yet, the narrative coherence of the sounds of the clear progression from purposeful hammering to suffocated struglia is hauntingly specific. The timing is locked to the tidal clock, not to random geological events. Seismographs in the house record the vibrations, but also pick up rhythmic, low-frequency patterns that do not match typical wave action. To stay in the tidal memory house is to inhabit a chronograph of tragedy. You are not a guest, but a witness. The day is divided not by hours, but by the tide table. At low water, you listen to the ghost of industry, the echo of work left unfinished. As the sea returns, the atmosphere shifts to one of mounting dread. The muffled cries and the vibrating walls create an immersive, inescapable empathy for the men below. You feel their predicament in your bones. The house is a fossilized moment of transition, from action to entrapment. It does not haunt with a single ghost, but with the echo of a process, a catastrophic shift in circumstance that repeats with lunar precision. The stone remembers the last frantic hours of the boatworks. And every rise and fall of the tide plays that memory back, translating it into sound and vibration for anyone in the house above. A permanent, somber monument to a race against time that was lost, over and over, forever. In an old, respectable boarding house on a quiet city street, there is a room known as number 7. By day, it is unremarkable, a modest rectangular space with a high ceiling, a worn rug, and a single large window overlooking a narrow garden. It is used for storage now, filled with forgotten furniture draped in dusty sheets. Its dimensions are clearly defined, its corners sharp. But when the last of the daylight fades and the room is lit only by the pale glow of a street lamp through the window, a subtle transformation begins. The room starts to feel larger. It is not an optical illusion that can be photographed or measured. It is a perceptual dilation, a feeling that the walls have subtly retreated into the shadows. The far corner, where an old armoire stands, seems farther away. The ceiling feels higher, the darkness above more profound. The familiar space stretches, not in a frightening way, but with a quiet, unnerving elasticity. As if the room is exhaling after a long day of being confined to its daytime dimensions. This expansion of space announces itself through sound. A visitor's footsteps, muffled by the rug during the day, now echo with a crisp, hollow resonance. The sound seems to travel further, bouncing off surfaces that feel farther apart. A single footfall produces not one sound, but a series of faint, diminishing repeats, like a stone dropped down a deep, dry well. The echo lasts a heartbeat longer than it should, violating the known acoustics of the small room. This sonic discrepancy is the first concrete evidence that the space is not behaving as it should. It is within this expanded, echoing chamber that the most profound effect takes hold. The simple layout becomes confusing. The door back to the hallway seems to shift position in the periphery. The draped furniture takes on ambiguous, looming shapes. This mental fog is accompanied by a distortion of time. People report losing minutes, sometimes even half an hour, while feeling they have only been in the room for a few moments. They might enter to retrieve a stored item, only to emerge feeling dazed. Their companions asking why they took so long. Watches confirm the missing time, a gap in awareness with no memory to fill it. The history of the boarding house provides a fragile clue. A century ago, it was a private home owned by a reclusive clockmaker, Alastair Finch. He was a man obsessed with precision and the mechanics of time. His workshop was rumored to be in the room that is now number 7. Neighbors spoke of his odd hours, of light seen in that window at all times of the night. He lived alone, and when he died, his estate revealed a curious fact. The room was found empty of his tools, save for one thing, a complex, incomplete mechanism believed to be an experimental clock, designed not to tell the hour, but to measure something else entirely, perhaps the elasticity of a moment, or the space between seconds. Alastair Finch's lifelong work, his attempt to manipulate or understand time itself within that room, may have left a permanent impression on its reality. The room feels larger at night because, in a sense, it is, stretched by the ghost of an experiment that sought to expand the container of a moment. The disorientation and lost time are direct results of this residual field. To enter is to step into the echo of the clockmaker's work. The mind, confronted with a space that defies its own rules, becomes unmoored. Time, still measured accurately by watches outside, becomes subjective and slippery within the room's influence. You are not haunted by a ghost, but by an idea, by an abandoned attempt to bend the laws of physics. Leaving behind a room that still, on some level, believes it is larger than it is. And that time within it is a substance that can be quietly, gently lost. The vanishing room does not offer terror, but a profound and quiet mystery. It is a place where perception is untethered from fact. Where a moment can stretch and thin like shadow. Teaching those who enter that some spaces are not defined by their walls, but by the weight of the thoughts they once contained. Thoughts that reached for the impossible and left a permanent, whispering strain on the nature of reality itself. On the very lip of the continent, where the land gives way to 1,000 feet of empty air and the endless Pacific, stands Edgekeeper Home. It is a modest, weather-beaten cottage, built of driftwood and stubbornness. Its most famous, or perhaps infamous, feature is not its location, but its sole piece of furniture. In the main room, before a large window that frames nothing but sky and sea, sits a single wooden chair. It is a simple thing, worn smooth by time and salt air, facing permanently toward the view. For decades, through changes in ownership, through storms and renovations, the chair remains. This is not a legend, but a documented frustration. New owners, wanting to refurbish the space, have taken the chair away. They have donated it, burned it, or thrown it into the ravine below. Without fail, within a day or two, the chair is back. Not a copy, but the same chair, with its unique scratches, its particular warp, sitting in the exact spot, facing the bay. Reappears in the locked house, on the empty floor, as if it had never left. The locals in the nearby village do not find this strange. To them, it is a matter of fact, a piece of local geography as fixed as the cliff itself. They believe, simply, that someone is still on watch. A duty is still being performed. A property assessor named Anya was sent to evaluate the cottage for a potential sale. She was a woman of facts and figures, and the story of the chair was a quaint obstacle to be documented and dismissed. She arrived to find the space barren save for the infamous chair. As part of her assessment, she decided to remove it herself, to prove the cycle was a myth of inattentive owners. She carried the chair out, placed it in her truck, and drove it 10 miles to a charity shop in town, making a point to be seen doing so. She returned to the cottage to finish her measurements. The room felt different, not haunted, but incomplete, like a sentence left unfinished. She worked for several hours. As evening approached, she went to lock up. There, in the center of the empty room, was the chair. It faced the window, as it always had. The hair on her arms stood up. Her truck was still locked. The charity shop was closed. Yet here it was. She approached it slowly. The wood was cool. A small, familiar resin stain near the left rear leg, which she had noted earlier, was present. It was undeniably the same chair. It was 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 the same chair. Anya did not touch it again. She spent the night in a local inn, and the next day, she began to ask questions, not about real estate, but about history. The story she pieced together was not one of tragedy, but of devotion. The cottage was built by a man named Elias, a lighthouse keeper from a now automated station down the coast. After he retired, he could not abandon his vigil. He built this home on the cliff, where he could still watch the sea lanes. His wife had long passed, his children were gone. His entire purpose was observation. He would sit in that chair for hours, every day, watching for ships in distress, for changes in the weather, for the simple, steady horizon. He was not looking for something. He was looking after something. When Elias died, the chair remained. Anya's professional report listed the chair as a permanent fixture, with a value of 0 and an immovability of absolute. Her personal understanding ran deeper. She now believes the chair is not an object, but an appointment. It is the physical manifestation of a promise to watch. The cliff edge is unguarded, and so, the chair holds the post. It does not matter who owns the house. The duty is to the place itself, not the deed. The chair returns because the watch must not lapse. It is less a haunting and more a relentless, silent shift change that never ends. Anya left the keys with the village elder. They are not afraid of the chair. They know that Elias, or the essence of his vigil, is still on duty. And they will not interfere. The cottage is not a home. It is a watchtower. And every evening, as the sun dips below the horizon, anyone glancing up at the bluff can see the silhouette of that simple chair against the great window. A silent sentinel ensuring that someone, always, is guarding the edge. The house that leans back perches precariously at the edge of a cliff, its foundation etched against jagged rock and the relentless pull of the sea below. From a distance, it appears to cling to the earth with fragile determination, its frame weathered and tilted subtly toward the water. Visitors approach cautiously, noting the warped walls, sagging rooflines, and uneven angles that give the impression of motion even on calm days. During storms, the house comes alive. Wind lashes against walls and windows, rain hammers the roof, and the sea churns violently against the cliffside. The structure seems to resist the elements, creaking and groaning with each gust, walls bending and sighing like joints in a living body. Observers describe a sensation that the house itself is aware, bracing against collapse while standing steadfast above the water. Stepping inside is a study in tension. Floorboards flex under weight, old beams shift with storm pressure, and the faint vibrations of wind and water travel through the frame. Each creak and pop amplifies the sense of the house's precarious determination. Visitors report feeling the building beneath them, an intimate sense of structure resisting the forces around it. The walls seem to flex just enough to maintain balance, communicating strength and fragility in the same rhythm. Light and shadow play across surfaces unpredictably. The lean of the house exaggerates perspective, making angles feel disorienting. Windows shake with the force of wind, producing resonant tones that seem almost communicative. Observers often pause to listen, hearing the subtle cadence of structural movement as if the house itself is alive, responding to external stress with a measured, deliberate resistance. Outside, the environment accentuates perception. Rain falls in sheets against stone and wood, the ocean crashes with unstoppable energy, and wind scours the cliffside. Each force met with structural endurance. Observers note the tactile feedback of floors and walls underfoot, as though the building is breathing in tandem with the storm, bending just enough to survive, yet never yielding entirely. The psychological impact is immediate. Visitors report heightened awareness, an acute perception of every motion and sound. The interplay of movement, vibration, and sound creates an immersive experience, where the line between observation and participation blurs. Each gust of wind, every groan of timber, reinforces the sense that the house is sentient, negotiating its survival with the elements. Time itself feels altered in the presence of the house during a storm. Seconds stretch as attention is drawn to subtle flexes in walls and floors. Peripheral vision tracks motion that may not exist. An anticipation heightens each sensory input. Observers describe a growing connection with the building. A sense of shared struggle, as if the structure is aware of their presence and includes them in its silent exertion. The lean of the house is deceptive. Even when storms pass and calm returns, the angles and tilts remain. A lingering reminder of the forces it has endured. The constant negotiation between fragility and endurance. The building's posture, its subtle motion, and the soundscape of shifting wood and stone produce a lasting impression, one that persists in memory and imagination. Interior details accentuate the sensation. Rooms slope slightly, walls lean unpredictably, and ceilings bow in places. Rooms slope slightly, walls lean unpredictably, and ceilings bow in places. Light filters through aged windows, highlighting uneven surfaces and distorted lines. Observers notice the interplay of perspective, shadow, and tilt, producing the illusion of movement even when none occurs. The combination of structural lean and environmental interaction creates an immersive spatial experience, where perception is challenged and every step demands attention. Visitors often describe a profound respect for the house. It is neither threatening nor overtly dramatic. Yet the subtle, constant shifting conveys a sense of life and determination. The building resists collapse, stands against wind and rain, and leaves an indelible impression of endurance. Observers depart with the memory of creaking walls, the pulse of wood underfoot, and the uncanny awareness of a structure that negotiates with nature, while maintaining its place above the water. Observers depart with the memory of creaking walls, the pulse of wood underfoot, and the uncanny awareness of a structure that negotiates with nature while maintaining its place above the water. The house that leans back endures as a testament to resilience and perception. Storms reveal its subtle motion, its quiet resistance, and the immersive connection between observer, structure, and environment. Angles, creaks, and flexes produce a tactile and visual dialogue that cannot be fully explained, leaving visitors with an experience that is at once unsettling and awe-inspiring. It is a place where architecture, nature, and perception converge, where leaning walls and groaning beams tell the story of survival, endurance, and the delicate balance between fragility and strength. Thank you, my dear friend, for standing with me on the edge of these haunted Chesapeake Bluff homes tonight. These houses were built for beauty, for peace, for breathtaking views of the bay. But the land beneath them is restless, and the water below never forgets what it takes. If you ever find yourself walking along a Chesapeake Bluff after dark, remember these stories. Do not linger near the edge. Do not follow shadows in empty houses. And never ignore the feeling that something is watching from the water below. The bay remembers every home that ever stood above it. And sometimes, it reaches back for what was built too close to the edge. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because along the Chesapeake cliffs, the houses are never truly empty.